Raven Scar. Raven Scar stood in the Great Hall, 10 of her strongest warriors standing close behind her, their hands close to their weapons. Their eyes were watchful as the nobleman entered, a tonsured monk by his side. The monk smiled thinly at Raven Scar as the nobleman sat down in a throne-like chair. To Raven Scar, he looked like a perfumed prince, decked out in his finery and gleaming jewels. "He puts on quite the show," one of her men muttered. Instantly, the monk at the nobleman's side began to interpret. "No need for the monk," Raven Scar interrupted. "I know the tongue of your people." The nobleman jumped as if pinched. "How is it you know our tongue, Dane?" Raven Scar shrugged, happy to have caught the Englishman off guard. Perhaps she had played her hand a little too soon here, but there was no going back now. Besides, this invite had intrigued her, and she was eager to know what business was afoot. "A monk taught me when my grandfather, Floki Vilgerson, settled in Iceland. There were Irish monks already upon the island. Most of them chose to flee." She smiled wickedly. "But some few were convinced to stay. One of these men, if that's what you want to call them, taught me your language, although he was very old by then. He died of the bloody flu not long after I reached my 21st year." "Interesting," the nobleman replied. "I would not have thought your people capable of such learning." "I am better at learning than you are at fighting," she spat, feeling the anger welling inside of her. "I wonder if you would be so brave with your insults if you do not have these men here to protect you." "And I wonder if you would be so brave if you didn't have a horde encamped outside the town gates." Raven Scar smiled slyly. "But I do now, don't I?" "I wonder why these men follow such a pretty little girl into battle," the nobleman questioned, stroking his thin beard thoughtfully. "I am no little girl, Englishman. I am a shield maiden of Vanschfurger. You think these make a difference," she said, banging a scarred fist at her chainmail-clad breast. "You treat your women like a strong wind will knock them down. But my people know the true value of a woman. Believe me. They've taken many of yours." "Such hatred in one so beautiful," the nobleman sighed. "But I did not come here to trade insults. I came here on behest of my king." "Which one?" Raven Scar laughed. "You have so many." The nobleman ignored that and continued. "My name is Oswald," he said in the way of introduction. "I am lord of these lands and have been appointed by King Egbert of Wessex, and now of course Mercia, to propose a sort of peace between us. My lord is in the middle of drawing all the other kingdoms of this land under his dominion, and frankly has no time to waste on raiders and pirates from the north." "You mean he hasn't the men?" Raven Scar interrupted. "You can use all the pretty words you please, but it all comes down to the same thing. He hasn't the men." "What are you saying to him?" One of the nearby warriors grumbled, a giant of a man with a great red beard. "Be still," Raven Scar hissed. "He's about to make us an offer." Once again, the nearby monk began to translate, and Oswald smiled knowingly. "Of that you are quite right. I do have an offer for you. Something more precious than all the gold and silver you stole from our monasteries. May God forgive your heathen ways," he said, making the sign of the cross. At this, Raven Scar drew back a little, not liking the thought of Christian magic, but soon stood upright and proud, knowing the Allfather would protect her, for the Christ Lord was weak compared to Odin One-Eye. "An offer greater than gold and silver?" she mused, genuinely interested. "What is this offer, Englishman?" Oswald whispered something to the monk, who quickly scurried away, returning moments later with a long roll of parchment in his hand. "Come," the nobleman said, taking the offered parchment and heading towards a table by the fireside's flickering glow. "Come and see what my master offers you." Raven Scar did as she was bid, her men clustering tight about her. "This," Oswald said, unraveling the parchment and revealing the map within, "is a map of all the territories now in the hand of my king. To the east is Rochester, now under the control of his son, the most noble Ethelwulf. It is my master's bidding to have his son rule there for a time. The kingdom is rich with great sweeping pasturelands and dense forests full of game and deer. The streams are fresh and clear. It is these lands," he said, pointing at a charcoal circle by the coast, "that my master is offering to your people. From the ocean to the foothills will be yours to do with as you please, to start a colony of your own, free from attack. There are many small villages and towns nearby for you to trade and barter with. You will be under the protection of Ethelwulf, but you must agree not to raid. Well, not on the king's lands anyway. What you do further north where my king's enemies make their encampments is no concern of ours. All this can be yours if you stop your raids on the monasteries and coastal villages." Raven's Scar stood and threw her men away from the eyes and ears of the watchful monk. "The king is offering us land. A lot of it. A rich place to the east if we stop our raiding." "Huh, land?" one of the men huffed. "What would we do with land? We're warriors, not farmers." "And we still can be," she said, signaling for the big man to lower his voice. "The king doesn't want us to stop raiding. In fact, I think he wants to encourage it to weaken his enemies. We can raid, just not his lands. Besides, if we accept this offer, his lands will become our lands, and you don't shit where you eat. I think we can have it all. A rich land free from English attack. From what I can see, this place has its back to the ocean. From there we can launch our ships and raid to the north, and perhaps even to the coast of Ireland. And if it should all go wrong, we have a perfect foothold for any upcoming invasions." The men began to talk amongst themselves excitedly. "What say you?" she hissed at them. "Well," Oswald demanded. Raven's Scar turned to him, her eyes as deep as the ocean. "Agreed." The next day, Raven's Scar gathered her forces and boarded her ships. There were 4 of them in all, each carrying 30 seasoned warriors. Another ship with a light crew carried a treasure hoard, everything from gold and silver to common pots and pans. From the dockside, the nobleman Oswald watched with hooded eyes. Leaping back to land, Raven's Scar approached, carrying a large golden cross inlaid with semi-precious stones under one leather-clad arm. "What's this?" Oswald smiled thinly. "A parting gift?" "No such thing. Think of it as a barter." "For what?" "The monk," she replied, nodding towards the waiting vessels where the monk sat at the prow of her ship, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket. "I don't understand," Oswald replied with a raised brow. "You already have the monk?" "Yes, but only as a guide. I want to keep him." "And why would you want that?" "Does it matter?" Raven's Scar replied, offering up the heavy gold. "No," Oswald replied. "As a matter of fact, it doesn't. Keep the man and do what you will with him. Now, if you would be so kind, I would have you gone from this place. I'm a busy man with much to do." "I would start by melting that cross down," Raven's Scar smirked. "If your king finds out you took it, he may just nail you to one of your own." Laughing, she leapt across the churning water, landing cat-like, and ordered the advance. Oswald stood on the dockside for some time, a shark-like grin on his face, until, at last, the vessel disappeared into the growing mist. It was nearly another hour before the captive monk worked up the courage to approach his new mistress. "I am not going home, am I?" he asked. "No." She turned to him, her face impassive. "I saw you pass that cross to Lord Oswald and the greed in his eyes. Do you think you can buy my soul with it, daughter of Odin?" "Not your soul," Raven Scar replied. Just your knowledge. And perhaps your life. My life belongs to Christ. Are you so eager to meet him, then? Life can be sweet, monk, she said, looking him up and down. He was tall for an Englishman, with strong, chiseled features. With a little more meat on his bones, he would be more than a little attractive. How old are you, Christian? She asked, drawing closer. My name is Alfred, and I am in my 25th year. We're of a similar age, then, Ravenscar replied thoughtfully. Tell me, the monk said, why do they call you Ravenscar? She thought on this for a moment, then shrugged. When I was a little girl, no higher than your knee, my father took me hunting. I managed to get a shot off at a deer, but my aim was not so great as it is now. I merely wounded the beast. It ran off into the forest. We tracked it for hours until we found it dead upon the forest floor, ravens feeding upon its flesh. Knowing no better, I charged the flock, slashing at them with my dagger. The birds panicked and shrieked. As they fled, one of them gave me this, she said, throwing back a dark blonde braid revealing a deep scar, white with age, that ran from her left eye across her face, petering out by one finely shaped ear. The people of my village said it was a curse from Odin for interrupting his feast. But my father convinced them it was no curse, but a gift. A blessing from the Grey God. He was good at convincing people, my father. She grinned. Does your father still live? Alfred asked, pulling his thin blanket tight about him to ward off the growing sea spray. Enough of your questions, Ravenscar replied, turning from him. Go check with the helmsman that we're still on course. Your maps are even more wretched than your language. Alfred skittered away, not understanding the way of Northmen who seemed quick to anger and more than a little impatient. He wished he was back in the monastery in Dorset, surrounded by his own kind, with a warm fire in the earth. But he had a feeling those days were far behind him, and the future seemed bleak. It seemed very bleak indeed. 2 days later, they made landfall. The last part of the journey had been an uncomfortable one, as they sailed through a deep swamp, the terrain all about them seemingly to change and undulate, strange shadows moving in the swirling mist. The air stank of rotting vegetation and stagnant water. Every now and again, animals would crash through the surrounding bush, calling to one another in strange, shrieking voices. But at last, the clinging mist cleared, and they got their first glimpse of their promised land. After much grunting and heaving, they beached their narrow vessels and gathered up their equipment, most of the men grumbling angrily. There was a sudden cry of pain, and Ravenscar spun about, seeing the Christian on the floor, the side of his head bleeding. Stewed over him was Einar, a great bearded giant, a fearsome warrior who was both dreaded and hated among the surrounding men. For Einar was a giant amongst giants, known for his bullying ways. Easily insulted, he had killed more than one of his shipmates from the perceived insult and had even crossed his captain on more than one occasion. Hurrying, Ravenscar drew her dagger, concealing it beneath fur cloak. You lied to us, monk, Einar grated, kicking the squirming monk in the guts. Half the land you promised us is back there in that stinking swamp. He was just about to kick the moaning Alfred again when he felt the prick of Ravenscar's knife in his ear. Kick him again, and I will shove this blade through your brain, she whispered into his face. Einar grew stock still, but his voice vibrated with anger. You chose the life of this Christian over that of your own people. Not over them. Over you. The monk is worth 10 of you, you dung-filled fool. So go on. Do it. I want you to do it. Einar did no such thing, but flinched away from her knife. For a moment he stood there, knuckles white where he gripped his sword, but now the surrounding men had closed all about him, grumbling angrily. Sensing the mood, he stomped away, muttering angrily under his breath. Take a look around you. Ravenscar addressed the crew. Look at the lush fields, deep forest, and the rolling hills. All this is ours. It is not all we were promised, true, but it is still more than we have ever known. Think back to our homeland, scrabbling at the frozen ground for food, enemies on every side, but I tell you, the earth here is rich, she said, grabbing up the loamy earth and letting it run through her fingers. The forest is heavy with game and deer. Even that stinking swamp will be brimming with eel and fish, and the ocean only a small boat ride away. Come, she said, leading them like she had always done. Tonight we will feast upon and bless this new land. Behind her, her men roared their approval and followed on. It was late into the night when the first talk of sacrifice started. The men had spent the day setting up tents and unloading the ships. As the evening came on, they built large campfires and feasted on freshly caught game, and drank heavily of nutty brown ales, barrels of mead and wine. It was, of course, Einar that had stirred them up, his voice growing louder and more demanding as the night grew on.
We need a sacrifice, he slurred. A sacrifice to appease Odin and to bless these new lands. If we insult Odin with some wretched animal, he'll curse us. The lands will become barren, the crops will not grow, and the animals will flee. Our nets will be empty. No, brothers, it must be a human sacrifice to appease the Old Father.
Ravenscar heard all this from where she sat by her tent, staring moodily into the fire.
It will be the monk they will be wanting.
A soft voice croaked from nearby. Ravenscar turned to the old woman by her side, grateful for her company. Yes, Agda, they will want the monk. She smiled weakly to the wise woman. But I can't let them have him. We need him. His knowledge, it's more valuable than the strongest sword arm.
What are you thinking, child?
The old woman asked, already knowing the answer. Einar. He's the one stirring them up. He's been nothing but trouble since we first joined the crew. It's only a matter of time before he tries to take command. I shudder to think that he would do to me before he slit my throat. I felt his eyes crawling all over my body, and I like it not.
Looks like you already have the answer to both your problems.
The old woman chuckled.
Give the men the sacrifice they seek and get rid of your competition. Like killing two birds with one stone.
And if I should die? Ravenscar asked, climbing to her feet and loosening her sword in its scabbard.
Then the Valkyries shall come to take you to the glory of Valhalla.
The old woman grinned. Very well. Ravenscar returned her grin before heading into the night. Einar wasn't hard to find. His voice was the loudest from where he sat hunched over the fire. His eyes were red and his voice slurred, as Ravenscar approached. Feigning a drunken swagger, she pretended to trip, soaking the big man's head and shoulders with frothing ale. The surrounding men laughed uproariously as Einar leapt to his feet, spitting curses. Ravenscar took a couple of steps backwards and laughed in his face.
If only it was piss. You fucking bitch.
Einar growled, his face turning first red, then purple.
You're unfit to lead.
Before the surrounding men could even react, he had already drawn his sword and charged. With a cry of fury, he came on, swinging his broadsword high into the air, intent on chopping his tormentor in two. But his drunkenness and fury made him clumsy, something Ravenscar had been counting on, as she easily sidestepped, dragging her small, short sword across the bellowing giant's midriff. His leather armor took the brunt of it, but still blood began to flow.
You're going to die today, Einar, she mocked. Even now I hear the cries of the Valkyries. Then they're coming to call for you, Einar spat. Not that you're worthy of Valhalla. Straight to hell is where you're going.
Suddenly he lunged forward with frightening speed for one so big. Ravenscar just managed to jump away, thrusting her own sword forward almost by reflex, opening up Einar's forehead in a welter of blood, blinding his eyes. Ravenscar knew an opportunity when she saw one and bounded forward, slashing at his unprotected legs, cutting deep into his thigh. Blood began to spurt, and with a cry he fell to his knees, hands gripping the bleeding wound. Ravenscar came forward, the flat of her sword smashing into the side of Einar's face, felling the giant like a crippled ox.
"You want a sacrifice?"
she screamed at the cheering men.
"You want a sacrifice? Then take him and give his soul unto Odin."
The men surged forward. The name of the Allfather fell from their lips as Einar's blood consecrated the ground. The next day, the real work began, as Ravenscar organized the buildings of the new settlement. Some men were sent to fell trees, others to hunt the forest and scout the surrounding area. Ravenscar herself took a small party into the swamps, their boat laden down with coarse nets and thin reeds like baskets for the trapping of eels. This was dirty work, and that's why she'd chosen it to show to her men she was not above such thing. Still, she did not like the swamp. There was something oppressive about the place, a kind of watchfulness as if something was waiting to slink forward, to close in. Ravenscar shuddered and pulled her cloak tighter as insects buzzed about her unprotected face. Now and again, the men would drop a net or reed basket over the side, eager to get the job done and be away from this hateful place. "Ravenscar," one of the men said, pointing a blunt finger into the thinning mist. "What is it, Asmund?" she said, following his gaze. "I saw something," he replied. "Looked like some kind of building off into the mist." Ravenscar looked closer. Asmund was right. There was something. A kind of looming shadow sat atop a large, jutting outcrop raising out of the brackish waters. "Over there," she commanded the oarsmen. "Take us over there." The oarsmen did as they were bid and soon drew closer. "It's a monastery," Asmund exclaimed excitedly. "Looks abandoned," Ravenscar mused.
"There could be treasure,"
another crew member said excitedly. "We should look inside." Ravenscar thought on it for a moment. She'd been told no raiding on the king's land, but if the place was deserted, then, as far as she was concerned, finders keepers. Fine. "Moor the boat," she said, clambering onto the rocky shore. "Asmund, you're with me. The rest of you stay here. If you hear a ruckus, come on the run." The men nodded their agreement as Ravenscar started up a short flight of stone steps chiseled out of granite rock. Soon they reached the top and got a good look at the looming building, but there was nothing. No lights burned in the blunt-arched windows, no sounds of muted prayer. Not even a chicken squawked in the dirt-filled yard. "The door is open," Asmund grinned. "Looks like they want us to come inside." Best not to disappoint then." Ravenscar answered his grin with one of her own as they both started forward, swords drawn, eyes watchful. The interior was dark and weakly lit by the smothered sunlight. All about lay overturned benches. The wooden altar had been smashed and the cross on the stone wall had been inverted, the gleaming wood scored and covered in a dark substance that could only be swamp mud or shit. "By Thor's hammer! What has happened here, and what does that mean?" Asmund said, pointing to the hanging cross. "It is a vile insult between the Christians. It is a mark of the devil, an affront to their Christ god." Asmund huffed. "The Christ god is weak. Odin would have struck down any who insulted him this way." Ravenscar nodded her agreement but said nothing, noting a strange smell in the air. "Do you see any signs of fire?" she asked. "Can't you smell it?" "Yes," Asmund replied, looking about. "But there's no sign of burning. Not here, anyway." "Come, then," Ravenscar said, heading towards a small door at the back of the building. "The monks' quarters should be through here. Let's see if we can find and then get the hell out of here. I don't like this place. Feels wrong." "Aye," Asmund agreed, following close behind. "It does." They were in a long, narrow corridor, arched doors on either side. Ravenscar shoved one of them open, revealing a narrow cot. a small wooden desk, and not much else. The monks' quarters. Check the other rooms. Asmund did just that, but they found only much of the same. They were approaching another door now at the end of the corridor. Once again, Raven Scar pushed through, only to be stopped dead in her tracks. They were in a large kitchen, or what was left of one. In the far corner was a pile of dead bodies, burned black and skeletal. "The monks!" Asmund gasped. "By Odin's beard, what happened to them?" "Some sort of raid," Ravenscar replied, nudging the blackened heap with one booted foot. Just then a hand shot out of the now writhing mass, grabbing at her ankle. With a cry, she jumped back. The pile began to twist and heave. Shocked, she watched on, her mouth hanging open as two bodies broke free, their glowing blue eyes filled with a terrible hate. And Ravenscar fancied she could feel a coldness emanating from them, freezing her crawling skin, making it hard to breathe. One of the things croaked something at her in a strange language before lunging forward, her paralysis breaking as the bone-like fingers wrapped tight around her throat, squeezing with a terrible strength. Struggling to breathe, she thrust the creature hard away, sending it tottering backwards as she shoved her sword into its ragged chest. But the creature merely grunted, smashing her hand away, leaving her sword protruding from its chest. To her left, Asmund was engaged with the other creature, slashing at it wildly, but with seemingly no effect. Desperate now, Ravenscar vaulted over a wooden chopping block and grabbed up an old iron skillet, smashing the growling creature across the face, sending shredded flesh and bits of broken teeth flying. She hit it again, and again, sending it staggering away. She wrenched her sword loose, pulling free blackened ribs and jagged bone. With a cry of fury, she sent her sword sweeping through the air, decapitating the creature with one fell blow. Instantly it fell and lay still.
"The head, Asmund! Take the thing's head!"
But it was too late. The creature had backed the howling warrior into a corner. Now, with the last of its failing strength, it leapt at him, its ivory teeth clamping down onto his shoulder. Instantly, Asmund's skin began to blacken as he peeled forth scream after scream, smoke billowing from his gaping mouth, his eyeballs liquefying and running down his smoldering face. With a scream of outrage and terror, Ravenscar charged, chopping her sword down into the clinging creature's head, shearing its skull nearly in two. The thing fell away. Asmund was down, but with the horrifying metamorphosis continuing to do its terrible work. "Forgive me, brother," Ravenscar gasped as she brought her sword whistling down, sending his head rolling free and ending his misery. Backing away, she turned and fled. Ravenscar had felt fear before. It was always present at every raid and before every battle. She had always been its master, but now it mastered her completely. She fled in horror, arms pumping, seeing nothing in her blind panic as she burst through the hanging monastery doors and out into the coming dusk. Rushing through the courtyard, she took the stone steps, 2 at a time, leaping into the waiting boat, ignoring the men's hurried questions.
"Row!"
she commanded.
"Row for your lives! Get us out of this forsaken place!"
The warriors hurried to the oars and pulled away. "Where's Asmund?" one of them dared to ask.
"Dead," she growled. "There's something in this swamp, something evil, and I intend to find it and to root it out. By the blood of Thor, I will have my vengeance for this."
The men turned from her, pulling hard for their new settlement.
"For this I will have vengeance,"
she growled, knuckles white upon her sword. Her words were carried on the wind and soon swallowed by the growing mist.
Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta. I wanted to tell you thank you for watching today's video on YouTube or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. If you guys are watching on YouTube, then that means you can find the podcast on Spotify or anywhere else that you happen to listen to podcasts. And if you guys are listening on the podcast, hey, if you want to find some older episodes or a whole bunch of stories you've never seen before, you should check out youtube.com/MrCreepyPasta. And no matter where you are, I really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and hitting that bell reminder, just so that you can always find a new story as soon as it becomes available. And I want to give a big thank you, as always, to all of my Patreon subscribers on Patreon. All my patrons on Patreon. You guys are the real MVPs. You are the ones that allow me to do stuff like getting specific stories just for the channel. All those wonderful things that come from Dale Drake, those are because of all of you. If you guys want to see more of that, then I would really, really, really love if you guys could help support on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, like some of these wonderful guys, such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, KhaosArts, Kryolinian, Milk and Miel, Celty K. Sturloson, Zachary, Graffius, It's All About That Fucking Music, Goreng, Trimagasi, Maria Walker, Tonya, Oran, paingravy, Krazy Kid, MrMarcusBlitz, Aika, Limchoc, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Dabbles Raz, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Matthew McNeese, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Raltazal, Ficomel, Nana, Nick Weaver, Melted Lake, Tolly Sue, Sky Mara Ravenswood, William King, Darth Milver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Nessie, Barterhawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Billy Morrow, Sashi Suzaku, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Nicholas Sicardi, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Paulson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. You guys, as well as everybody if you look down in the description, and everybody that can even just give $1 to be able to help things out. I really appreciate it. If you guys would like to join this list of names that I horribly, horribly mispronounce, check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. And honestly, even you guys who just listen, you watch, you comment, you like, you subscribe, thank you all. I really appreciate it. And sweet dreams.